Hello and welcome to the January 24th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. This is Mike Hogan here without my regular crew. Jonathan Kinchin and Peter Thomas Fornatel are both en route to Las Vegas for the National Handicapping Championship. So today we have a little bit of a different show, and it's my pleasure to be joined by Mr. Craig Milkowski, the chief figure maker for TimeformUS. Welcome, Craig. This is your first time on the podcast.
Yeah, it is. And if you prefer, you can call me Craig John Milkowski. That'll fit with the other host.
Well, I think we only have one three-initialed person on the podcast. So we only have space for one. So, or we could call you CJ. I know you go by CJ sometimes. Okay, fair enough. Well, welcome. I'm glad to have you on. This is your first time on the podcast. For the regular listeners, why don't you give your 30-second background on how you got into horse racing, what makes you love the game, and why you ended up here on a Tuesday morning on the DRF Players Podcast.
Just the quick lowdown. I went to high school with Larry Colmus, and his dad did the sound systems for Maryland tracks, and he eventually bribed me into going with him one time. And I thought, wow, this is fun. And then I went a few more times and realized, wow, this is pretty hard. So started reading everything I could get my hands on from, Andy Beyer and James Quinn. And you name it, I read it. And I kind of gravitated toward the speed figure side of thing and eventually pace figures and started doing them on my own and grew from there. That's how I got where I am today.
Awesome. Well, I think many of our listeners know DRF has partnered with TimeformUS, and so now we are able to have folks like you on. We're able to talk about your products, able to talk about your approach, how you guys look at the races a little bit differently from, say, maybe a lot of the people that are more familiar with the DRF PPs and, of course, the Beyer speed figures. So we'll dive probably a little bit more deeply into some of that stuff later in the show, and certainly on Friday, when you get to join again, and we'll be having Byron King from the Daily Racing Form on. The three of us will roundtable on that amazing Pegasus card that is now out, and I know everyone's diving into. Have you had a chance to look at it much?
Only the Pegasus itself. I haven't looked at the undercard yet. I usually wait till it goes final with the morning lines, but I've heard a lot of complaining about the Pegasus, and it's a two-horse race. But, as a fan, it doesn't get much better than this. Two just super horses facing off, against each other with some, I don't think the field's as bad as others are making it out to be. I don't think it's just going to be a match race around the track. So
absolutely. I'm absolutely with you. Look, what's the alternative here? Last year, maybe it's American Pharoah in a repeat of the Breeders' Cup Classic with 3 or 4 or 5 other horses in there. This year you get a rematch of an amazing race in the Classic, and you get a full field, regardless of whether or not you think anybody can upset the top 2. I would rather see 12 going to make for a more interesting race from at least a vertical standpoint than having a rematch of Chrome and Arrogate and 2 other horses. A 4-horse field just doesn't interest me. So I like it. I'm glad we've got it. Should be a very, very interesting race. And made even interesting, I would say, by yesterday's post position draw. And frankly, I don't know how much the draw is going to affect the actual outcome. Maybe to some extent between none at all and the number one factor, I would say it's closer to none at all, but there's certainly some effect of Arrogate drawing the 1 hole, Chrome drawing the 12 hole. And in my thinking, this is the most that post positions could affect the race.
Yeah, if you look at the Classic, it was almost the opposite. Arrogate was outside, Chrome drew the rail, he saved ground all the way, so I don't think it's a huge factor, like you say, but I don't see how anybody could look at it as a positive for Chrome. He's definitely going to lose some ground. Noble Bird in the field, who's almost surely going to gun for the lead. So it's not going to be able to cross over. I'm sure Arrogate's going to want to hold a position fairly close from the inside. So, just from a ground loss perspective, it's definitely going to be a change from that first race.
Absolutely. And I think the one silver lining for the Chromies is at least the horses drawn immediately to Chrome's inside. They're ones that don't seem to have much early speed, and he should be able to outbreak them at least and get a little bit better position going into the rail. It's not like he's breaking right next to, say, Noble Bird, where then I would be absolutely with you. He's going to be caught wide no matter what.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to lose, 4 or 5 lengths around the first turn. I just don't see that happen.
Right.
And two pretty evenly matched horses. If you're changing a few lengths of ground loss, maybe it will be the difference. But.
Yeah, and I've seen some people talk about, oh, look, well, now it's just going to be a repeat of the Travers, and I don't know. I'm not really look. I don't want to knock Arrogate's Travers because I think it was probably the best performance we saw in 2016, and certainly the best two-turn performance we saw. But that said, he got a major assist from his uncoupled entry mate when American Freedom kind of floated out wide on the turn, pushed Gun Runner out into the 3 or 4 or 5 path, allowing Arrogate to kind of cut the corner on that first turn. The race was over at that point in my mind.
Oh, sure. And not to take too much away, like you said, because, I mean, he still went very fast to get that lead.
Right. Exactly.
Bit of a snowplow there in front of him clearing the path.
Yeah, but, I think we saw it in the Classic. It's not like Arrogate has blazing early speed, and with legitimate speed in there like Noble Bird, I think California Chrome is faster early. Arrogate's going to have to work a little bit to keep from getting hemmed in on the rail on the first turn. So it makes, while I think Arrogate certainly got the better of the draw than Chrome did, the rail isn't the best spot for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that. And we also have the, it's not a huge one, but we definitely have a weight shift from the Classic where our level weights this time instead of 4-pound spread that we had last time. So if you're a weight guy, you got to take that a little bit into consideration.
For sure. And speaking of weight, I don't think any of them are taking it into or taking advantage of it. But I see in the conditions that there's a 5-pound weight allowance for horses running without Lasix, which is interesting. And even though it may not affect this year's field, I like that sort of weight break for certain horses, especially some of the Europeans maybe in the future I could see coming over and taking a shot. Actually, there is. Aragon is taking advantage of it. I'm not sure that's going to make a difference for that horse, but I like it. I like those kinds of conditions.
I do as well. I love it. I wish that would become the standard in horse racing, to be honest.
Yeah, right. All right, there's a few other, we'll move on to other stuff in a minute, but I wanted to just quickly mention a few stats that I tweeted out from the Formulator account last night, as well as another stat that we saw kind of going around on Twitter. One of them is since 2006, when they remodeled Gulfstream Park, in 9 furlong dirt routes, the 12-post is 1 for 18, and the one win is Big Brown in the 2008 Florida Derby. Is that a stat that is at all going to factor into your handicapping, Craig?
To be honest, no, it's not. Other than, like I said, he's probably going to lose a little more ground than he did last time. But as far as that as a stat itself, I've been a database guy for a long time, do a lot of database mining, and anything that comes up with a sample size of 18 is basically worthless in my opinion.
Well, I love stats, and I don't even mind small sample size ones. I mean, if it's a very, very compelling stat from a small sample size, I'm okay with 18. But what I want to know is I want visibility into those other 17 runners. Were they all long shots? How many of them hit the board? Did any of them outrun their odds? Were 11 of them 5-1 or lower and none of them hit the board? Those are the kinds of small sample size stats that I need more information on before I take them at face value.
Sure. And even, I will use some smaller stats when it's a short time frame, short-term stats. You see a trainer get hot, like you saw Rudy Rodriguez last month at Aqueduct, or you see him this month, he can't win a race hardly. Those kind of things I noticed, but something that's going back to 2006 with a sample size of 18. I'll either do the work and, see if there's really anything to it, or but I'm not just going to take that at face value.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. A couple other stats. Bob Baffert's last runner at Gulfstream Park was 2007. His last winner was Captain Steve in the 2001 Dawn. The only thing I take out of that is, look, he doesn't ship to South Florida very often, but I don't see that as any sort of knock at all on the chances for Arrogant.
Bob Baffert's shown many times he can pretty much ship anywhere and win.
Right,
so.
right. And supposedly he couldn't ship into Saratoga, and then and then we saw what he did on Travers Day, not just with Arrogant, but of course with Dre Fong as well. All right. The last one being Art Sherman's only had one runner at Gulfstream Park. That horse was eased in 2004 in the Sunshine Millions distaff. Again, another one that doesn't really do much for me from a stat standpoint. It just tells me he doesn't really ship to South Florida, because why would you? I mean, he's based in California. He's got good purses out there. But look, he shipped this horse to Dubai, did fine there. He shipped them all over, and it seemingly has been no worse for the wear. I would be more concerned about the 12 post than the shipping.
Right. I mean, how many horses he even had that would be worth shipping for? He's not Bob Baffert or Todd Pletcher. He's a great trainer, but he doesn't have that kind of stock. So
right, and it makes
shipping in the running an 8,000 Claimer or something.
Right. It absolutely makes sense that he's going to ship for like something like the Sunshine Millions, because I can see him having a decent Calbred and taking a shot. And back in the day when they were running half of them in Southern California and half of them in Gulfstream, and it was Calbreds versus Florida breds. That made sense. That makes sense to me. All right, let's.
Much better, by the way.
I agree. I miss those races.
Bred races, bring back the old format. That was.
I agree. A lot of really interesting races there. All right, let's pivot a little bit to some of the races from the last weekend. Of course, the Lecomte was the big Kentucky Derby prep. It kind of was a bit of a slop fest. I'll ask you, what do we make out of that performance? Is there a horse that you want to take out of the race from either a trip handicapping, a speed figure, a pace standpoint? And how do you, as a figure maker, approach a day like that where it really is just a lot of sloppy races?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Normally I'm leery when the track is wet. I'm try to be very alert for changes in the track. See when does it look like it changed speeds to me? But the fairgrounds on Saturday wasn't one of those days. I thought it was pretty darn consistent. I'm looking at the chart of the Lecomte and it shows muddy. I would have sworn I heard an announcement that they upgraded it to good right before the running, but because I remember tweeting, well, it still looks the same to me. The track didn't make any difference in that race than it did for the others, but that was a consistent card. But you have to take that into consideration as these horses move on. I mean, some horses like wet tracks and some don't. So
yeah, right. In a sealed track, yeah. I mean, exactly. It's hard for me to know what to do with those horses, and the ones that ran well, yeah, I mean, maybe they're legit, but the ones that maybe didn't perform so well, maybe the sealed muddy track is a little bit of a built-in excuse to not dismiss them next time out. Guest Suite, of course, was the winner. Untrapped running second. From a trip standpoint, I actually am a little bit more interested in Untrapped going forward. How did they match up in terms of your speed figures?
It was 103 for Guest Suite and 102 for Untrapped, and I'm not trying to fool anybody here. That it's a slow race for 3-year-olds this time of year.
Sure.
A little hard to get excited. For those not familiar with our numbers, I would say a pretty rough estimate is if you take away 20, that's going to be about the buyer speed figure.
You're almost spot on. It was an 82 for a Guest Suite and 80 for Untrapped.
The one that would interest me in here the most was probably Takeoff. The pace was a little bit on the quick side, and he was caught wide around the first turn when the race was fastest. He hung in pretty good to finish a close third. So if I had to pick one as a betting guy going forward, he's probably be the one I'd give the hardest look to. And also Guest Suite just looks like a horse that's going to like more distance. He's won both his races around fairly easily. And, these are 3-year-olds. One thing I've learned as a bettor is don't always knock them when they're too slow, because they're always changing when they're 3. They just seem to get better and better.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, improvement is the name of the game at this point. And, Guess Sweet seems to be a horse on the improve, and he seems to be pretty decent. I agree it wasn't the fastest running, but maybe the surface had something to do with that. And my main takeaway is, yet again, just like we saw in the Smarty Jones 5 days before, this is another horse who seemingly just flatters McCracken. And I'm excited to see the return of McCracken. They announced that the Sam F. Davis is probably going to be his first start in 2017. And he looks to be, along with Classic Empire, at least on the non-West Coast horses, the most legitimate of the 3-year-olds this year so far.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to that one myself because I'm going to that with my wife. Our first trip over to the Tampa area. So
nice. That'll be fun.
Part of our visit to go to Clearwater and go to Tampa on that Saturday. And to get back to the race, I mentioned it was on the slow side. Just as a comparison, in race 7, I think it was the Louisiana Stakes. I don't even know how to pronounce it, Holcomb or Holcomb.
Oh, how yeah. You're probably as close as I would get.
He's not going to be anybody's Eclipse list, and that horse won with a 118 speed figure over what I essentially say was the same speed surface. So, it was a nice win, but he's definitely got some room to grow if he's going to be a factor going forward into the Derby preps.
Absolutely. And I'm quickly going through and looking at the buyers for that race. Yeah. Hawacom got a 98. So that makes sense. 16 points better than Guess Sweet did. All right, let's talk about some other races. I know you had a couple that you thought were interesting from a pace scenario standpoint. One of them being on the Fairgrounds card, the Colonel E.R. Bradley, the 8th race, and one of the ones on turf.
Yeah, this was definitely, this can show you just what pace does. Granny's Kitten, who finished 3rd behind Western Reserve when the pace was more average, just totally turned the tables on him this time. Western Reserve still ran a good race, but the pace was faster. He actually got into kind of a mid-race duel when Chocolate Ride was moved up to kind of engage him on the turn. And, those kind of little things make the difference, especially on the turf. Granny's Kitten just set the perfect trip behind those two, moved out. And, that's what you got to look for in turf races, the pace, the trips, more so than the speed figures even. And that's coming from a speed figure guy. They still have some relevance, as I don't remember who it was. I heard, there's no trips in slow races. You still got
Harvey Pack. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But, it just shows how a little bit of pace, just a slight change. We weren't talking like this was some blazing fast pace, but it was enough that the 6 furlong fractions coded red in our PPs. It really sped up from the half to 6 furlongs. And, that made the difference between Granny's Kitten getting up the win by a neck and between finishing 3rd behind the same horse last time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's just the difference between a neck. And if he's able to slow it down even slightly and maybe get a little bit more of a breather, then it's flipped the other way. One other one that I know you wanted to talk about was at Aqueduct on Sunday. And was that I'm drawing a blank, the Interborough? Is that the name of that one?
Yes, it was the Interborough. And this was just your classic 2-horse speed duel around the track with, a horse sitting in the garden trip, Tot Crease. Disco Chick and Hot City Girl just hooked up early and stayed that way until the stretch. And, just your classic case of Disco Chick winning the battle but losing the war. And our speed figures at TimeformUS take pace into account. Disco Chick got the best figure in the race, even better than the winner, Tot Crease. It's just one of the things you got to look out for. When these two run back, who do you want? Right. It's easy to say, well, Disco Chick won, but what if she runs in the Hot City Girl again? So you have to take everything into account. But these are the kind of races you make notes of, and I think you can find bets going forward.
Right, absolutely. The one thing I'll note, I haven't heard anything since the race, but I know prior to the race, the plan was that if Hot City Girl won, they were going to continue racing her in 2017, and if she didn't, they were going to send her to the breeding shed. I don't know if the 3rd place finish for her is enough to end her career and send her to the shed, but that's maybe one thing to keep in mind. All right, I'll kind of put you on the spot, and it's fine if you don't have anything to talk about. But aside from stakes races, just any other interesting races or interesting performances or pace scenarios or even, dare I say, biases that you saw come up from over the weekend?
I'm trying to remember. I know Oaklawn on Saturday was a pretty interesting card. We don't get a lot of tracks that we consider were, I hate saying closer bias because that's almost never the case, but anti-speed.
Right.
The speed just did. Speed just was not good at Oaklawn on Saturday, and it carried all the way over to the stakes race. I think it was the Dixie Bell. But it's one we know, and I don't call them bias codes. Some people say, oh, you have the track coded as bias. All we're telling you is speed did a lot worse than we would have normally expected. I mean, that's up for the handicapper to go in the charts and maybe look into it a little deeper. But a good example from the Dixie Bell was the heavy favorite was Vertical Oak. I know she was 1-9 at one time. I think she wound up going off 2-5 or 3-5. And, she was a horse that on that the track that basically didn't favor speed, which kind of tells her the rail wasn't the place to be. She was kind of stuck on the rail battling with another horse for the lead all the way around and kind of faded through the lane and finished fourth. I think she was beat about 5 lengths. But, that's one where you can give an excuse. I mean, just everything went against her, and maybe you get a better price next time if people don't do their homework. It's another race where we had all the fractions weren't bred, so this wasn't just a moderately fast pace. It was a very fast pace for this group. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the sort of thing as not just a trip handicapper, but somebody who pays attention to all of the races on a card. That's the kind of thing that can absolutely make you money down the line, because you're right. A lot of players will just quick and easy see, as the 3-5 favorite, Vertical Oak just faded and finished fourth. Well, they don't realize that the horse she was dueling with through those incredibly fast fractions ended up finishing 6th of 7, and it really set it up for the ones to come from off the pace. And Chanel's Legacy kind of got the garden trip and ran away.
Right. That's what I call the hidden bad trip. I mean, everybody sees when horses get blocked and steady, or it's what they think's a bad ride, but especially when it's a speed horse. People don't think, see a horse on the rail right up on the lead and just fades. They don't always look, the pace was fast. It wasn't the place to be. So definitely that's a horse to watch is Vertical Oak. Now, it's Steve Asmussen, so I wouldn't expect 10-1 or anything when she moves forward. But, you definitely get a better price than what you got last time. And it wouldn't surprise me if she could turn around and beat all the horses that beat her this time.
Right. All right, let's move on to something else that happened on Saturday. And it was, of course, after the races, the Eclipse Awards. And, not too many surprises in terms of who was awarded with the top honors. I think the biggest story that came out of it was really at the end of the night, what was up with that speech from Perry Martin.
All I could figure is the guy eats a lot of beef jerky and he sees that little pack in there, the desiccant thing. I used to be a refrigeration air conditioning mechanic, and we used to talk about desiccants a lot to get the moisture out of refrigerant. That was all that was running through my head because I couldn't figure out what in the world point he was trying to make.
Wow. And he did okay, accepting the award earlier in the night. And it didn't seem like he had too many to drink between the earlier speech and the later speech. I don't know. It's just one of those complete head scratchers. And why you get up there accepting an award for a horse of the year, you don't mention your horse, you don't mention your trainer, you don't mention any of the races, you don't mention the groom, the rider, anything else. Your partners.
Yeah, I just didn't get it. I mean, I love a good rant as much as the next guy. I mean, I'll just randomly pull up Allen Iverson or Jim Mora on YouTube to watch because they're hilarious. But this one wasn't funny. I mean, it was it just seemed so off the cuff and just didn't make a lot of sense. But I guess he made headlines. So
yeah, well, we're talking about it even a few days later.
It's good publicity, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it seemed like his whole goal, and maybe he thought he was funny, but boy, if you're in an audience where your whole group, everybody in the audience, with the few exceptions, of course, the ones being nominated, but everybody that voted for you and everybody else in the room is a turf rider. It's fine to maybe make a little fun of turf riders. It's another thing to go for the jugular and talk about how turf riders are so stupid that they would probably be the ones that would eat the desiccant.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. Yeah, and then it seemed like almost someone said, all right, Perry, I'll give you $50 if you get up there and you rant about turf riders and then you rip on your old hometown.
Right. The best part was the people behind them weren't in on it because they looked as puzzled as the rest of us. I mean, that was
for
the
sure.
best part of it, watching their faces. Most of them didn't even want to pick their head up. They were just kind of looking down at the ground going, oh, my gosh, what is going on?
Frank Taylor, I think, got like 4 or 5 texts. He was kept looking at his phone the whole time, and then he stepped in after the music started to
I was going to say, yeah, the MVP was definitely the band.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't even realize it at first. And he's, oh, wait, is that for me to get off? It was classic. And the tweet of the night was probably the host, Janine Edwards, with just the 4-letter help with 2 exclamation points.
That says it all right there, because you probably won't meet a nicer person than Janine Edwards. I remember when she was the track handicapper at Laurel Park. And, she was that's where I'm from in Maryland. She was always very friendly, very accessible. I mean, you just couldn't meet a nicer person. And for her to reach out for help during that is just, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about that speech.
Yeah, well, and it also tells you that nobody, the hosts, not his crew on stage with him, nobody had any idea what Perry Martin was going to say when he stepped up to that mic. And boy, I mean, I guess it's a good thing from an award standpoint that he's probably not going to be on the stage anytime soon, because I'm not sure what he would say the next time he got in front of a mic. No. But let's move on to some of the awards. Of course, California Chrome swept Older Male. It was unanimous vote for Older Male. He was a landslide winner for Horse of the Year, 202 votes versus 40 for Arrogate. I know you weren't a voter, Craig, but from your standpoint, do you think that the difference between the votes was justified from a landslide perspective, or were you surprised that it wasn't a little closer for Arrogate?
No, I mean, my personal opinion, I think it was about right. I'm not big on rewarding horses for, I mean, basically he ran 2 big races all year. I mean, allowances and listed stakes, that's just not going to cut it. And I don't want to see it trended where, horses race a little enough as it is these days. The last thing we need is horses gearing for a Travers or Whitney Breeders' Cup campaign, and that's it, because they know that's all it takes to win the Horse of the Year. So I think Chrome, he ran, he showed up in all the big races. He won all of them until the last one, and it's not like he was disgraced by Arrogate. I mean, he ran a very good race to be a close second, and I just think his overall body of work earned him the award. Absolutely,
and I think some people have said it's a little bit of a disparity that, or it's hard to reconcile that Longines had Arrogate listed as the top-rated horse and California Chrome second, yet California Chrome won Horse of the Year and Arrogate didn't. Wasn't even close from a landslide perspective. I don't think there's any disparity. I don't think, and I'm with you. I mean, there's a difference between Performance of the Year. There's a difference even between Best Horse and Horse of the Year. And if you're looking at the full body of work, it's absolutely California Chrome. And the difference in, I get the point. I get the 40 that voted for Arrogate. It's not like I don't think that they got it wrong. I can see the case for him, but just the way the award is named, it's Horse of the Year. It's not Horse of the last few months.
Right. Yeah. And Arrogate, I think, is the better horse personally. Like I think most people do. And I picked him in the Classic actually to beat Chrome. I was pretty sure he was going to beat him. But when it comes to an award, I just think Chrome earned it. Now, had Arrogate won, I'd have probably for about 2 seconds been, man, I don't agree with that. And then I don't get too hung up on those things. It's kind of fun. I was actually looking, I have the couple of the Champions books from DRF, and I look through them from time to time, and they actually list all the Eclipse Award winners. And it's amazing how quickly you'll forget all this stuff. It seems
Sure.
like a big deal, and I'm sure it is to the connections. But as racing fans, as embedders, I would say you'd be very surprised when you look through those award winners how many you forget. And I'm not talking from 1995. I'm talking 2013 and 2014. I was like, wow, that horse won an Eclipse.
Well, right, and it's not awards for horses that you want to bet going forward. It's not a handicapping award. It is strictly based on performance on the track. And I know one of the ones that you, if you had a vote, would have gone against was 2-year-old female. Champagne Room won, and it wasn't even close. 202 for her. New Money Honey second with 21.
Yeah, I would have went with New Money Honey. I just think she gave a better performance. I mean, it's not like Midnight Champagne had some sterling resume, with stakes wins leading up to the Breeders' Cup. She essentially won for winning what I think was a terrible Breeders' Cup juvenile fillies based on history. And kind of it's been backed up if you look at the chart and see the horse that have run back from it. It's just not been a good race. But, it's the biggest race, I guess, and we favor dirt more than turf. So I'm not going to fret about it very long. I mean, it's, she won the award. She's a beautiful horse. I remember seeing her in the paddock with my wife out at Santa Anita, and she was striking. I was like, wow, that's not enough that I would have bet on her. That would have been too smart. But I didn't pull the trigger there, and she beat me out of the pick 5 or pick 4, whatever it was. But it is what it is. We'll see going forward. But she won the biggest race for the division, and a division that's not that strong. So
right,
she gets it.
Right. I'm with you. I don't think any of them from that field are going to be in the short list of my contenders for the Kentucky Oaks unless there's some major improvement that happens between now and then. But
how's happened?
Absolutely. These are 2-year-old fillies turning 3. So. But I think more than anything from a voting standpoint, it shows the predominance of how many voters favor the dirt races over the turf races, because that 10 to 1 vote difference between New Money Honey and Champagne Rune shows you just how important those dirt races are for a lot of the voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I can see it. I think it is changing a little bit. We've had several turf horses be horse of the year lately with Wise Dan and, a couple others that going back. But I think when it comes to the juveniles, people just aren't taking the turf races very seriously yet. They're
right.
Still fairly new. So I can understand it.
Absolutely. One other thing of note, not really a surprise, but Finest City won for female sprinter. I haven't done the work, and I don't know, but it's a little bit of a unique accomplishment that you have a horse win a race on the same day that they get awarded as an Eclipse Award winner, because she won, of course, on Saturday earlier in the day at Santa Anita in the Santa Monica. I don't really have anything more to say other than that's kind of a pretty cool, unique accomplishment.
Yeah, I don't ever remember seeing anything like that. I mean, it's probably pretty rare there's even a race for, an Eclipse Award winner on the same day that they give out the awards. But it was definitely interesting when it was pointed out. I couldn't think of any unless, maybe it had fallen on the same day as the Dawn or something, but I can't remember.
Right. Like, I guess if she absolutely is. And I think they found out the right surface and distance for her. They tried stretching her out. She ran into Beholder. They tried the turf, But I guess it would have been possible. We could have had 2 if, for whatever reason, they decided to run Classic Empire on the Lecomte. We could very well have seen him. He was a 2-year-old male, unanimous. All 248 votes went to Classic Empire. Which is
he's probably the leader of the division right now. So.
For sure. But I think it's closer. I'm like I said earlier, I'm interested in the Kraken. I think Bob Baffert's got some good ones out on the West Coast, and Mastery and American Anthem. So you never know. It's a lot can happen between now and the first Saturday in May.
No, I'm a guy. I'm not trying to pick my Derby horse in January. I'm trying to pick the winner of the Risen Star and the Rebel and the Withers or whatever is coming up next. I focus on what's next before I look too far ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm absolutely with you. I know some people like to go. This week, of course, is the National Handicapping Championship in Las Vegas. I think there's going to be a lot of players out there, not just playing in the NHC, but also looking to put down their Derby futures bets. I don't know. It's the futures bet has just never been one that appeals enough to me, just because so much can happen between now and even, we're talking 4 months and a week or two. That's for these 3-year-olds, that's almost an eternity.
Right. I mean, how many times is even for the pari-mutuel future bet? I mean, even up until the last pool, we have the field winning at times. They can't even narrow down to 23 horses and get the winner.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they've never been for me. I can barely pick the winner on Derby Day itself, let alone in January.
Right. And I'm guaranteed to get my money back if the horse doesn't run, whereas that's not the case. And so, all right, you talked a little bit about your approach is more on the races that are coming up this weekend, like the Withers, which will be next weekend. This weekend, of course, we've got all the races at the Pegasus. We'll be going over those in depth on Friday. Also an interesting card, perhaps at Santa Anita with the Cal Cup Series. That's what happened now after the Sunshine Millions kind of blew apart. We had the Florida bred races last weekend. Some interesting ones there. We haven't even mentioned any of those races. The California version is going to happen this weekend. So a lot of different races to look at from a stake standpoint should come into play on the NHC. Let me ask you this. When you're starting your handicapping fresh, I know you're a figure maker. I know you're a pace figure maker. How do you approach when you're looking at PPs for the first time? What's the first thing you do?
The first thing I do I just go horse by horse, and I'm looking. I try to identify at first who I think's the fastest horse or the best horse, which sometimes is a morning line horse, sometimes not. And I just work off of there. I go each horse and I try to compare it to that one and see, do I think on this horse's best day, can he beat that? Can he beat the favorite or the horse I think is the best? And that's, I kind of narrow it down to who I think can win before I even worry about odds, what the odds are. Because, you hear a lot of talk about people love betting overlays, but if the horse can't win, what difference does it make?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, this horse is 20-1, but he should be 10-1. But yeah, he's 10-1, but it's a 5-horse field. Did you really have a chance? That's the way I look at it.
Right. Yeah, my joke is I'll give you 1,000 to 1 on the Washington Generals.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you absolutely have to bet for value in this game, but you also have to figure out who can and who can't win the race. There's a lot of horses that theoretically are value, but I know if they run the race, 100 times, they're going to need some luck to win it. So those aren't the kind I want to bet on.
Absolutely. So when you make that assessment, are you doing it first and foremost on speed figures, final speed figures, or are you doing it more first on, okay, I think this horse is going to get the lead. They're going to be loose on the lead. And even though they don't measure up in the previous races, that's okay because of how I know with certain surfaces and distances at this track. Are you making your assessment on the quality primarily on the visuals from a trip handicapping standpoint or on your speed figures?
I mean, when I narrowed a horse down to contenders, I'm looking at overall ability first and foremost. I think a lot of the things you mentioned are what I consider secondary factors. They're the things I'm going to use to separate the contenders. But I'm more of a, hey, how fast is this horse? How is he getting better? Is he getting worse? I'm definitely a big pattern guy. I like horses that are on the improve. Everybody has pretty good speed figures these days when they're betting. I think most people do. So betting the top figure in the last race is usually going to be a losing proposition. I like to look for horses that I think are improving enough to beat the top figure horse in the race. Mm-hmm. I'm a big second, third, fourth off the layoff kind of guy. I'm a hidden improvement kind of guy. I look for horses that maybe their speed figure declined, but they were, had a really bad trip last time and probably ran better than it looked and actually ran better. Another hidden one I'm really big on using is horses that have been laid off when they were 2 or early 3-year-olds and come back and, people will look and see an 80 buyer or 100 TimeformUS speed figure. And, that might be a horse that I'll say, hey, I know this trainer gets him ready quick. That 100's more like a 110 or a 112 now, and that can beat this field if he's ready, Whereas, maybe the favorites have been running 105s. That's the kind of horse I'm looking for. People still forget that maturity factor.
Absolutely. I said it on last week's podcast. We were discussing the Sunshine Millions Classic, and of course, Awesome Slew was everyone's single on pick 4s and pick 5s, and I thought he was maybe a little bit vulnerable in there. Of course, I landed on a horse who might have been eased, but part of that was because even if one of the others steps up, he didn't have such a huge advantage that justified him being 2-5 or 3-5 in the wagering versus a field like that. That's where I kind of approach it from a value standpoint. It's more, I also look to try and knock a favorite that I think if things don't go completely his way, and by all means, things did not go Awesome Slew's way in that race. He didn't get the lead. He had to go wide on the turn. And that those things add up.
Outside post at 1 1/8. There you go.
Exactly. Those things add up to beat short price favorites.
Yeah.
All right. So, and I'll ask you this as a handicapper, but I'm wondering if some of your answers will also carry over to your work as the chief figure maker. Are there certain types of surfaces, distances, certain types of races that you find easier for you to handicap or more difficult for you to handicap?
In the old days, I stuck to dirt. I didn't like turf, but I've come around where I really love turf because I think speed figures do work on turf, but you also have to watch the races and make some notes and realize what actually happened in the race. Because, one thing people forget is horses aren't racing to run their fastest time. They're racing to get to the wire first. So
right.
You have to know if that speed figure is really indicative of what the horses can do or what they can't. Like Songbird was a good idea. It's a dirt horse, but she was a good example. Everybody was saying, oh, look at her. She's running not so great speed figures. But I think it was pretty obvious that she could have run faster. You had to watch the races and turned out she wasn't good enough to beat Beholder, but she certainly ran a lot faster than she ever had before. And, everybody knew about that horse because it's a champion that everybody watches. But if you do the same things with your everyday claimant and allowance race, you can get an edge over your competition.
Well, absolutely. And I wouldn't even go so far as to say she wasn't good enough to beat Beholder because that's the race she ran in the distaff was absolutely a winning race. Is she just got the worst of the bob?
Right. Yeah. That was a tough beat for sure.
But yeah, you make a good point about sometimes, especially in turf races, the horses are more focused on the finish line, and the jockeys are more focused on the finish line than running the fastest race that they possibly can, because they'll sometimes crawl early and then sprint home. That's got to make it difficult for you to come up with a final speed figure that really encapsulates the level of performance that you're seeing on the track, right?
Right, it does. Turf is definitely tougher than dirt. And, our speed figures are a little different than buyers, and we do take pace into account. So when the pace is slower, we kind of weight the race more heavily toward the end of the race, and vice versa. If the pace is fast, you get a little extra credit for going fast early. So It's a little bit easier for me, but sometimes it's so extreme that you just have to put the race on an island and rate it separately from the others. And, it also you were asking about how I handicap races. One of the biggest angles I have is I look for horses that made the best move during the fastest part of the race, especially if they're wide. Those are great horses to bet back. But what I'm talking about is if the pace is slow early, by definition, that pretty much means it's a lot faster late. So you're looking for horses that lose ground on the second turn. If the pace is fast early in a 2-turn race, you want horses that lost ground in the first turn. And, those are things that you just have to watch the race. The charts are good, but they're not always as detailed as we'd like.
Right.
So it just doesn't beat it. And those are extremely tough trips to overcome. When you're losing ground during the fastest part of the race, horses that win those kind of races are doing something really special, because you can bet horses that run way back after trips like that, and they'll just improve markedly when they save some ground during the race and get a better journey.
Right, absolutely. You mentioned that your figures, your speed figures, incorporate pace. Of course, the Beyer speed figures do not. They're just a final time in a variant. So you're not going to have something like what sometimes might happen in your figures, which you mentioned did happen in the Interborough, where the second place finisher gets a higher figure than the winner does. Talk a little bit about why you came to the decision to incorporate pace. We did a whole webinar, which is absolutely worth viewing and listening to if you didn't get a chance to check that out. It's at drf.com/YouTube. We go into depth in a lot of that, but just kind of the overview. How come, as somebody that I know when you started making figures, were doing it more the Beyer way, how did you come to, over time, start to incorporate pace?
Well, it's one of those things. I went in the Air Force shortly after my introduction to racing in Maryland, and I was stationed in New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time at Garden State Park and Philly Park back then. I was at Parks now. And, you just, you get to learn that it's not always about the final time figures. I mean, you like to think they're a magic number and that they're going to pick the winner every time, and some people convince themselves of that. But when you really watch the races and then put the race next to some numbers and see what happened, it's pretty easy to figure out who actually ran the better race, and it's not always the winner. I shouldn't say ran the better race. I guess if you win the race, you ran the best race, but I should say showed the most ability.
Sure.
And one of the big things was pace. You'd see horses when they got an easy lead and set a slow pace, they would usually run better than they did when they battled and, dropped back during the stretch. And, I realized that a lot of horses were getting unfairly punished for getting hooked up in speed duels and, dropping back out, losing by 10 lengths after doing all the dirty work. And, it's kind of a shortcut. It saves me from trying to figure out, well, how much did pace cost this horse?
Sure.
They're not simple formulas. I would never try to get into it on a podcast here, but I did a whole bunch of study with databases to see how pace affects horses and whether it's contested or not. And those are where those adjustments came from. Basically, it's just a shortcut to say, rather than trying to figure out the pace, just look at it and see the fractions and know it probably costs a horse at least this much. Now, we all know a lot of those horses, as they drop back, they're not persevered with. So, it's not always a complete, the horse is 10 lengths back, they're not being, hard hand ridden to the wire. So
right.
We don't account for all of it. I try not to give too much extra credit, but we're just trying to paint a clearer picture of what happened.
Right. And I know some figures incorporate things like ground loss. Is that something that you've ever experimented with? And if so, why did you decide not to include those and focus more on pace?
I have experimented with it numerically, and actually I would probably love to include it in figures, but the problem right now is it's not readily available in a data format. So, as a computer guy, I'm doing speed figures for all the racetracks. It's not possible or feasible to do it.
Right.
When and if that day ever becomes available, I will certainly give it a shot and test it out. Because like I said, that's a big one for me.
Sure.
Ground loss especially during the pace. I'm not, if the pace is slow and you're wide, big deal. I don't care about that very much because, I always picture it if you go out to your local track. If you walk around the turn and I'm in lane 8 and you're in lane 1, I can probably keep up. Sure, I have to go a little faster, but it's not going to take me any more it's not going to make me any more tired than if I walked right next to you.
Right.
Whereas if we run and I try to keep up with you around, and I'm on the outside, then I really got to expend some energy to do it, and it's going to sap me later. And, so it is something I would like to build in, and I definitely use it in my handicapping, but it is not part of the numbers.
How do you use it in your handicapping? Do you rely on Trackus? Do you rely on more trips and marking how many horses wide they are on the turn? What's your, and how do you keep that kind of data?
No, I just watch the replays and I store it in notes. Now I'm back using Formulator again for the notes section. When we were on our own, I wasn't using Formulator, but I'm able to make notes in there and do it that way. I do look at Trackus from time to time, but to be honest, I'm not that concerned right now with whether a horse lost 15 feet or 18 feet. It's just not that important. I just want to know a horse was 2 wide or 3 wide or,
Sure.
And most importantly, when they were wide.
Right, exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why, to me, the other reason is one that we kind of noted a little bit briefly earlier in the podcast, is that sometimes you're better off being wide, depending upon how the track is playing on a specific day, or even how the track plays in general. I think the most famous one recently was that West Virginia Derby, where you basically wanted to be out in the outside rail. And I don't know if they have Trackus at Mountaineer. I don't think they do, but if they did, well, that was Cupid, right?
Right. Yeah, I think there was a few horses ran through the grandstand on that one.
I mean, Rafael Bejarano was
grabbed the hot dog.
Yeah, he was like in the 8 path or something, and that was where you wanted to be. So it's not foolproof, going wide and losing ground. Like you said, all things being equal, if we're running on a track where it's equal, and I'm going to the outside, I'm losing ground and expelling more energy on the turn than you are going inside of me. But it's not so cut and dried as that.
No, you would definitely have to be flexible. The Oakon on Saturday was a good example. You certainly wouldn't want to give extra credit to the horses that were outside when I think the rail was terrible. So, it's just, like I said, a lot of things are computerized with what I do, but there's not a single figure that I make that isn't looked at by me to see what really happened. I'm not just going to trust the computers with my, the data that spits out of my programs that I've written to turn the raw times into figures. You would definitely have to be the same with ground loss. Because like you say, yeah, maybe I'm running around the outside of that track and you're on the inside, but you're running through, gooey mush or something. So it's going to be tougher for you than on me, even though I'm going further. So that would definitely be one of the pratfalls of incorporating ground loss in the figures. It definitely would have to be diligent.
All right. Well, we've got only about 8 minutes or so left on the podcast, and I wanted to jump back to California Chrome. Last night, I tweeted out a few questions. Actually, they were true or false, partly because I wanted to get a little bit of discussion going about how people define terms like great. And so I'll ask it to you, Craig. Is California Chrome a great horse?
Well, we talked a little offline, and I would say yes, he is a great horse, and part of that's due to the longevity that, he's done it over almost 3 seasons now, going into his, actually his 5th year of racing, I guess.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so going into his 5th year of racing. Do I think he's one of the greatest horses we've ever seen? Like, if you put them all on a track at the same time, I don't. I think he probably would struggle, if you put him in a 10-horse field of horses I think are probably on the all-time greats. He probably runs near the back. And that's no knock on him whatsoever. I mean, he's a great horse. I like him. Heck, I've flown to Del Mar to see him. I went to the Breeders' Cup to see him. Not just him on the Breeders' Cup, but Del Mar, that was basically the point of the trip, just to go see him race. So, I do think he's a great horse, and I'm not knocking him at all. I just, I don't really think he's an all-time great.
Well, yeah, and maybe that's the mistake I made when I put that tweet out, is maybe I should have added all time in front of there, and maybe some more people would have paused a little bit. I think the response I got was, well, yeah, of course, was this a trick question? But the way I see it is he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's a deserving first ballot Hall of Famer, but there are. In all sports, there are Hall of Famers that I don't necessarily consider great. And I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I would call California Chrome a great horse. He is certainly one of the best of his generation. I would say arguably shared belief at his best might have been a little bit more brilliant, at least, than California Chrome. And I do agree with you that you get a little bit extra credit, especially in a game like racing, where it seems like our stars retire so early. I mean, not this time retiring as a 2-year-old. You get a little bit of extra credit for being consistently really, 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 really good over extended periods of time, in my book. But there was a time, it was 18 months or 15 months or so, where he didn't win a race on dirt. He lost head-to-head to Shared Belief when they both had it equal. I'm not going to talk about the Classic. He lost twice, even though he beat Bayern once. He lost twice to Bayern. One time he was certainly against the flow in the Pennsylvania Derby. But in my book, great horses overcome those kinds of obstacles. And, I don't know. I'm with you. I love the horse. I think he is a deserving first ballot Hall of Famer. I voted for him as Horse of the Year. I'm still not convinced he's great.
Yeah, I think I told you the analogy I like, because I just saw this last night. I'm a big tennis player. I was watching the Australian Open, and they actually announced the Hall of Fame nominations, and the first name they had up there was Andy Roddick. Yeah. And at first I kind of looked, I'm like, really, Andy Roddick? And I think it's similar, and I think he was also a first ballot, Hall of Famer. And I got thinking about, the guy won a U.S. Open. He was number one for a few months. And, I think it's, kind of similar. I don't think anybody would say Andy Roddick's an all-time great tennis player. He's probably not in the top 100, to be honest.
Right.
But, I can't argue. Is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? He probably is. And, he was a great player. So it's kind of a similar distinction. You have great horses for the time, and you have all-time greats. And I don't see him in that second class. It's no knock on him. And you know what? If he wins this race on Saturday and he obliterates Harrogate or something, maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe he adds to his resume and say, you know what? I was wrong. Maybe he is an all-time great, but we shall see.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, in my mind, his legacy, at least for me, maybe not for the rest of the horse racing fans and the horse racing community, but for me, his legacy is going to be a little dependent upon this race on Saturday. If he goes out in style, crushes a horse who so far has, both on speed figures and on the track, shown that he is just a little faster and maybe a little bit more brilliant, then maybe he gets that check mark for me, and I wouldn't have any hesitation calling him a great horse. Right now, I just kind of pause a little.
Right, and I think part of being great is you have to beat other horses that are great.
Yes.
And through no fault of his own, if you read through his past performances, I just don't see a lot of greatness there. You could say Beholder's great, but she is a mare, so
right.
He's supposed to beat her. Who else has he beat really? Dortmund, Wicked Strong. It's not he's beat who's lined up against him. But even his races in Dubai, you look at it, and it's not like they were drawing strong fields. And so a win over Harrogate might go a long way in furthering his reputation. But I don't see him having that big win yet.
No, I know. I mean, and for me, he's from a quality standpoint, he's on there with I don't know, maybe like a Lava Man or a Game On Dude, maybe a little notch above them. Maybe we're even getting into Tisnow category, but they're still not Secretariat, Seattle Slew, Affirmed, Easy Goer even. I again, I'm not knocking the horse, but I don't know. I reserve the term great for only a handful, and I'm just not sure I'm ready to go there with Chrome.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I also think we're setting it up where we're going to hear from the Chromies. But honestly, like I said, I am a fan, so take it easy on me. I used to say a lot of the same things about Zenyatta. I was disappointed with the schedule, and people gave me a hard time, and I was like, I drove 6 hours to go watch a race at Oakland. I said it's not like I dislike the horse or anything like that.
Right.
It's no easy drive, let me tell you. You get off the highway and then drive for about 3 hours in the mountains. So,
wow. Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're all, most of us, I would say, that are big handicappers and horse players are also fans at heart. And whether or not you like the Pegasus as a betting race, I mean, I think as a fan, you have to just be excited that we get another rematch. Or we get a rematch of the Classic, and we get to see them go at it again on the track, and we get to see Chrome run, whereas if this race wasn't around, he'd be already in Kentucky and he'd already be ready for the breeding season. So, I'm excited that we get to see him. I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan. I've been a fan of his all along, and that that doesn't mean that I think he's not a worthy Horse of the Year, worthy of being very, 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 very good, worthy of being in the Hall of Fame. So that'll be my final point.
Yeah, same here. I'll be rooting for him on Saturday. Probably unlikely I will bet on him, but I will definitely be rooting for him. So.
All right, I'm with you. All right, well, thank you, Craig. Really appreciate it. Your first time on the podcast, and I look forward to having you on again on Friday with Byron King, where we'll go much more in depth into the Pegasus. So thank you, and thank you everyone listening out there, and to those of you who are making your way to the NHC in Las Vegas. Safe travels and best of luck. And I hope if one of you is listening and ends up being the winner, that I hope we'll have you on the podcast sometime soon. So thanks, and we'll talk to you again on Friday.